My son said, "Dad, you can sit in the staff lounge. It'll be more comfortable there." I froze. I paid for the entire wedding, every single thing. Yet on the most important day of his life, I was pushed out of the hall, sitting next to a pile of rusty toolboxes. Why does a father have to endure such humiliation? Before you hear the rest of my story, subscribe to the channel and tell me where you're watching from in the comments. I sat there frozen in that narrow room. The dim light from a flickering fluorescent bulb fell over the stained walls. The plastic chair creaked under my weight, and the smell of machine oil from those rusty toolboxes made me sick. Just one wall away, the sound of live music, laughter, and applause filled the air. My son's wedding, the lavish ceremony I paid every cent for, was in full bloom. And yet my seat, the seat of the groom's father, was in a maintenance room no different from a storage closet. I had imagined this day for years. I pictured myself sitting in the front row, introduced with pride, watching my son exchange his vows. But no. All I heard was the booming voice of the bride's father, a wealthy man who'd never hidden his disdain for me, echoing through the wall. He spoke about true love and family happiness, while I, the man who raised Ethan alone, was erased from the picture completely. In my hands was a gray tie, the one Ethan picked for me. He once said, "Dad, wear this okay? I want you to look sharp on my wedding day." I believed him. I spent hours getting ready, shaving, fixing that tie. But it turned out to be just words, empty, polite words, like so many of his promises before. I heard the MC call out names, the bride's parents, cousins, friends from college. Everyone got a mention. Everyone got a moment. Except me. My hands clenched so hard my nails broke the skin. The pain was nothing compared to the humiliation, not just from the in-laws, but from Ethan himself. My own son. The small room felt even tighter. The dripping of a leaking pipe echoed like a heartbeat in my chest. I thought about those years, the late shifts at the machine shop, the cold sandwiches for dinner, rushing to pick him up from school. I gave up everything after Anna died, everything to raise him right. I thought one day it would be worth it, that maybe today I'd see a glimmer of gratitude in his eyes. But no, it was all an illusion. When I tried to stand up and leave, a young waitress walked by holding a tray of drinks. She looked at me almost embarrassed and whispered, "I'm sorry, sir, but they said this room fits better for the image of the event." I gave a dry laugh. The image. So that's all I was, a stain on their perfect picture. I looked at the crooked mirror on the wall. The man staring back had deep lines across his face, tired eyes worn by years of struggle. I wondered, does Ethan still see the father who used to rock him to sleep? Or am I now just a walking wallet, a tool to fund his dreams? Then the music changed, a soft waltz. The MC's voice echoed, "Please welcome the bride and groom for their first dance." My chest tightened. I wanted to see at that moment every father dreams of, but the closed door kept me out. All I had were the sounds, muffled and distant. A tear rolled down my cheek, not out of sadness, but from a pain so deep it felt carved into my bones. The pain of realizing I was now an outsider in my own son's life. I wiped it away, took a deep breath, trying to hold myself together. That night, under the dim yellow light of that cramped room, I sat for hours, listening to every toast, every laugh, every clinking glass. Each sound another cut to the heart. I didn't know when, but something inside me broke, and I knew one thing for sure: this cheap plastic chair would mark the beginning of a new chapter in my life. A chapter where I refused to be a shadow, even to my own son. I left that suffocating room when the music and laughter outside had finally faded, leaving only a heavy silence inside me. As I walked down the long hallway lined with red carpet, I stopped. Large wedding photos hung proudly along the wall. In every frame, Ethan and Sophia were smiling, their eyes full of dreams, wealth, and promise. But one thing froze me in place. I wasn't in a single picture. Not one. It was as if I had been erased, completely removed from the most important day of my son's life. I tried to steady myself, but when I stepped into the main hall, what I saw shattered me. Ethan, in his perfect tuxedo, stood beside Sophia's parents, raising a glass of red wine and calling them my new family. Applause erupted. I wanted to believe it was just a polite gesture, just words for the crowd. But the light in his eyes when he looked at them, the kind of warmth he hadn't shown me in years, killed the last bit of hope I had left. My throat went dry. I turned to leave, but before I could, I overheard one of the bridesmaids whisper, "Good thing Sophia's family upgraded the whole wedding package. If that old man had paid for everything, it wouldn't look this fancy." I froze. I knew the truth. I was the one who signed every check, covered every bill, and worse. Just days ago, I'd noticed strange charges on my account: luxury restaurants, cocktail parties, expensive dresses. And now it was clear my credit card had been used by Sophia and her family. The worst part, Ethan knew. He didn't stop them. He didn't defend me. He just stayed silent. I walked out of the hotel, the December wind cutting into my face, making me tremble. I tried to breathe, but my chest felt heavy, like something pressing down on it. My steps wobbled as I made my way back to my room upstairs. When the door shut behind me, I collapsed. The elegant hotel room suddenly felt like a cage. The ceiling spun, the lights burned too bright. My heart pounded wildly, ready to explode. I reached for a bottle of water, but before I could open it, my body gave out. I fell onto the carpet. In that split second, memories flooded in cold winter nights, wrapping Ethan in blankets, the endless overtime shifts to pay his tuition, the promise I made to always be there for him no matter what. And now, I was nothing more than an unwanted shadow in his life. I don't know how long I lay there. When I finally opened my eyes, everything was blurry. My ears rang and pain stabbed through my chest. The hotel staff had found me. They called an ambulance. Under the cold white lights of the hospital, I heard the doctor say, "Mr. Miller, you had a severe arrhythmia. You're lucky you got here in time." I nodded faintly, but inside I felt nothing. My body was saved, but my soul felt like it was dying. Because the real pain wasn't in my chest. It was in knowing my own son had betrayed me. That my in-laws saw me as nothing but a wallet. And that kind of pain, no medicine could ever heal. Something deep inside told me the hardest days were still ahead. During the days recovering after I collapsed, I avoided every call. The phone wouldn't stop ringing. Ethan, Sophia, even her parents. But I didn't pick up. I couldn't bear to hear another excuse. On the third night in the hospital, when all I could hear was the steady beeping of the heart monitor, someone knocked on my door. It was a delivery clerk. He handed me an old yellowed envelope. "This letter was kept in the legal file of Mrs. Anna Miller," he said. "She asked her lawyer to send it to you when the time was right." My hands trembled when I saw the handwriting Anna's. My wife gone for over 10 years. I'd often wished I could hear her voice again, read one more note. But I never imagined that wish would come true at the lowest point of my life. I opened the envelope. Inside were a few pages handwritten and faded. The hospital's white light shimmered over the uneven letters. I read slowly, and each word cut deeper than the last. "Richard, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. I've kept a truth from you, one I didn't have the courage to say while I was alive. Ethan, he isn't your biological son. Before I met you, I made a mistake. I was already pregnant. I begged for forgiveness when I decided to keep the baby, but then I stayed silent. You raised him as your own, and I was selfish to let you believe he was your blood. I'm so sorry. I know that even after learning the truth, you'll still be the only father Ethan ever knew. And maybe you've loved him more than any real father ever could." The paper slipped from my hands. My whole body shook. The room spun. The light above blurred, mocking me. I couldn't believe it. My entire life, every drop of sweat, every dollar saved, every sacrifice had been built on a lie. I remembered the day Ethan was born, how my hands trembled as I held him for the first time, the warmth of that tiny body. I remembered the pride I felt when he called me Dad. And now, what was all that? Just an act. Was I nothing but a stand-in never meant to know the truth? Anger surged through me. But then came silence. A heavy, suffocating silence. I didn't know who to hate: Anna for betraying me, or myself for being too blind to see. But the deepest wound came from Ethan. He wasn't my blood, and now he'd betrayed me again. He chose them. He chose to stay silent, while I was humiliated. Something strange happened then. The tears stopped. I sat still on the hospital bed, the letter still in my hand, but my heart had turned to stone. All the pain, all the hurt, all the loss froze into something cold and quiet, like a wall of ice inside my chest. On the last page, Anna had written, "If one day you read this, I hope you understand you've been a true father even in the face of a cruel truth. Ethan may not share your blood, but it's you who made him who he is. I hope somehow you can still be proud of that." Proud. I let out a bitter laugh. Proud of what? Of being pushed aside like a stranger on his wedding day, of giving everything only to be met with silence. I folded the letter, set it on the table, and stared into the dark. Outside, night had fallen over New York. The city lights glittered through the window. But to me, the world was already pitch black. And in that darkness, I knew my life had just taken a turn I could never come back from. Not only had my son betrayed me, but fate itself had lied to me for decades. And somewhere deep inside, a cold voice whispered, "Richard, it's time to stop being silent." That night I couldn't sleep. Anna's letter burned through every last illusion I had left. I lay there on the hospital bed staring at the ceiling, and one thought kept echoing in my mind: enough. I'd stayed silent too long. I'd swallowed too much humiliation. It was time they all knew the truth, every single one of them. The next morning, I checked out of the hospital earlier than the doctors advised. My body was weak. My chest still ached, but the anger inside me had turned into fuel. I went back to the hotel. The wedding after-party was still going on. People were laughing, drinking, celebrating, as if I never existed. I didn't walk through the front door. I went around the back through the service hallway until I reached the door that led straight into the ballroom. Music boomed, crystal lights sparkled. Then I heard the MC's voice. "And now let's raise a glass to the happy couple, Ethan and Sophia, and to both of their families." Both families. I let out a cold laugh. My family. Where was I in that picture? Where was the man who raised him, the one who paid for it all? I took a deep breath and pushed open the door. The whole room went silent. Hundreds of eyes turned toward me. Ethan froze. Sophia's smile vanished. Her parents frowned as if my presence alone had tainted their perfect celebration. I walked straight to the stage. A few staff members tried to stop me, but I brushed them aside. My voice came out rough but steady. "Sorry to interrupt, but this party's missing one thing: the truth. And I'll be the one to say it." No one moved. I pulled a stack of papers from my coat: receipts, payment records, contracts, and finally Anna's letter. I raised them high. My voice cracked, but I didn't waver. This entire celebration, every flower, every song, every glass of wine was paid for by me. I did it believing I was giving my son the perfect day. And what did I get in return? Humiliation. Murmurs spread across the hall. Ethan stepped forward, whispering, "Dad not here." "Quiet." I cut him off. "You had the whole night to speak. You chose silence. Now it's my turn." I turned to the guests, my voice echoing through the hall. "There's something none of you know. Ethan is not my biological son. I learned that just last night from a letter written by my late wife. I had no obligation to him, but I raised him anyway. I loved him as my own. And today he stands here beside his wife's family, pretending I don't exist." Gasps filled the room. Some people covered their mouths, others whispered in shock. Sophia turned pale. Her parents looked lost. Ethan stood, frozen lips trembling, but no words came out. I took a deep breath. Pain stabbed through my chest, but I stayed on my feet. "I have nothing left to lose," I said quietly. "You can call me bitter." Call me crazy. But the truth is, no one in this room has ever loved Ethan the way I did. And if today I'm treated like a stranger, then from this moment on, you're all strangers to me. Silence fell. Then the whispers spread like wildfire. Phones came up, cameras flashing. I knew by tomorrow this story wouldn't stay inside these four walls. Ethan rushed toward me, his eyes wide. "Dad, please stop. You're ruining everything." I looked straight at him. "No, Ethan, you ruined everything." I placed the letter on the head table right in front of Sophia. Then I turned and walked away. The music had stopped completely, only the scraping of chairs and hushed voices followed me. I didn't look back. For the first time in years, I felt something unexpected, not shame, but release. The weight was gone. As I stepped out of the ballroom, leaving behind the bright lights and empty laughter, I realized something. I was no longer a shadow. I had taken back my voice, taken back my truth. And from that moment on, I swore I would never be silent again. As I stepped out of the hotel into the freezing winter night, the wind whipped against my face, but strangely, my heart was calm. After everything that had happened, I no longer felt like the loser in my own story. I had spoken. I had stood tall. I had chosen freedom. The whispers, the ringing phones, the chaos behind those doors, none of it mattered anymore. Because at that moment, I knew the old life was over. By morning, every local paper had the story. Headlines screamed, "Father exposes secret at son's wedding, $1 million ceremony turns into scandal." Sophia's family became a public joke. Ethan caught in the eye of the storm. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing, hundreds of messages, but I didn't answer a single one. For the first time, my silence wasn't weakness. It was choice. A few weeks later, I left New York and returned to my small house in Boston, the one filled with old memories and dust. I cleaned the kitchen, wiped the shelves, and hung a wooden sign on the wall, "Miller's Corner, Coffee and Stories." It was a dream I'd once buried under years of work and responsibility, a small cafe where people could sit, breathe, and share their stories. Now, with nothing holding me back, I decided to finally live that dream, this time for myself. On opening day, the cafe was simple: a few wooden tables, warm yellow lights, and the rich smell of roasted coffee in the air. My first customer was Claire, an old co-worker from the machine shop. She smiled gently, setting a small vase of flowers on the counter. "I knew you'd make it happen, Richard," she said. I laughed, feeling something I hadn't felt in months. Warmth. Then came the next customer, and the next. Slowly, the place filled up, not with curious eyes chasing a scandal, but with people seeking comfort. Some shared stories of broken marriages, some spoke of loss, and some just needed a quiet place to study. I listened, I smiled, and for the first time in years, I felt like I belonged somewhere. Ethan came once. He stood outside the door looking thin and lost. When I opened it, our eyes met, and in his I saw regret, shame, and a distance that could never be crossed again. "Dad." "I'm sorry," he whispered. I nodded, replying softly, "It's too late, Ethan. Live with your choice. No anger, no tears." I simply closed the door and left the past behind. Strangely, my heart didn't ache anymore. Maybe because I had finally learned to let go. Time passed. The cafe became a kind of home, not just for me, but for everyone who walked in. Claire and I grew closer. Our talks drifted from work to books to music and then to life. One autumn afternoon, with golden leaves covering the doorway, she took my hand and said softly, "Richard, you've spent too many years living for others. Now it's time to live for yourself." I held her hand, and for the first time in a long time, I felt peace. On a quiet Saturday night, I hosted a small gathering at the cafe, friends, neighbors, familiar faces. We laughed, we ate, we shared stories, and as the glasses clinked, I raised mine and said, my voice trembling, but steady, "I once thought I'd lost everything: my faith, my son, my purpose. But it turns out only when you lose everything do you finally find yourself again. I'm no longer a shadow in someone else's story. I'm the main character in my own. Applause filled the room, followed by laughter, warm, genuine, alive. I looked around and saw faces that truly valued me, not for money, not for duty, but for who I was. Outside, snow began to fall softly. I took a sip of black coffee, breathed in its bittersweet scent, and smiled. My life had walked through darkness, but I had risen. I had chosen a new path, one of peace, freedom, and joy. And I whispered to myself, finally. Richard Miller has come home. I had walked through betrayal, loss, and heartbreak. But in the end, I found myself again. And that I realized was the truest victory of all. If this story made you think, please like, subscribe, and don't forget to share your own story in the comments. Thank you for listening.